Hey everybody, back for another episode, and I haven't done introductions for the last several, frankly because I was getting tired of the sound of my own voice, and the man I sat with today, Michael Diettrich-Chastain, gave me a piece of advice. He said definitely do the introduction, so I'm doing the introduction, which makes me feel bad I didn't do it for the last two, but they were really, really good ones, and hopefully that spoke for themselves. A little bit of housekeeping first. So I'm currently uploading all of these episodes onto YouTube as well, but I've changed my YouTube channel. My old channel is Body Navigation, which is still up, and I'm going to keep that just for body-related stuff. So I'll be posting more things on there in the near future. And I've put all the podcasts to another channel called Wisdom and Folly. So you can watch all the episodes up there. A lot of them have been through video recording recently. So there's a few up there with video. Today's was in person and we just did the audio. So now to introduce Michael. Michael and I became friends a number of years ago through Chinese martial arts, and even though we don't share the same lineage and haven't gone to the same schools, there's a lot of overlap, and we started pushing hands and sparring and became good friends that way. And I've had a lot of great conversations with him over the years, just about his observations in psychology and his work with leadership. And he just wrote a book, so it was great timing to sit down with him and just rap about dynamics and change and adaptability and leadership and group dynamics and a whole bunch of fun stuff. So hope you enjoy. All right, we're rolling. Thanks for taking the time, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. in your office, ironically, so you're having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here.
So let's jump in with kind of what. Maybe a little bit about your background and how you got to what you're doing and what you're doing. You just wrote a book about a bunch of interesting stuff. So give us a little lead in with that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I might go back a little ways, if that's okay.
Totally.
And so when I was in undergrad, well, I'll preface this by saying my interest has always been in human development, and then my career, for all of it in its various forms, is in human development and optimization in some way. And so when I was in undergrad, I was studying psychology and had this vision to move on to get a master's or PhD in what's called industrial organizational psychology, which is basically like the evaluation of human systems within a business. And so, I took the pre-work for that, did internships kind of for that journey. When I graduated, took a job as a consultant and account manager for a company out in Milwaukee. And was in that world for a little while, doing account management and some leadership coaching and some employer conflict resolution work and a little bit of sales, and it was a great experience, and it also kind of influenced me to want to take a deeper dive into the human development, the hows and whys of what we do. And so I went back and got a master's in counseling, and then became a psychotherapist and was in the mental health world for a number of years in a variety of capacities. So I was doing crisis work, and I did outpatient therapy, and I managed teams of therapists, and did work in the hospital systems and the jail systems. A lot of diverse experience over the course of a few years. And so still had this interest in business and teams and leadership. And so I moved away from the therapy world and kind of back into some corporate work, and was doing a lot of training, traveling around the country, doing workshops on employee engagement and team effectiveness and communication, and a lot of the topics that coincidentally I teach on now. And so was in that, working for that company for a couple of years, and then after that was inspired to start my own company. And so in 2015, I guess, started my own thing, and now what we do is essentially help leaders and teams become peak performers through the context of assessment, training, and then ongoing coaching. And I guess that's a little bit of the background.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, can you share any secrets that maybe you've learned from a lot of that different background and what you bring into the groups you work with?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so interesting, man, is when people hear the words therapy or coaching or training and consulting, I think people maybe take them as very different things. And in my experience, there's so much crossover amongst those kind of three disciplines, and so that's been a really interesting and exciting thing for me to see. Like, when I think about like working with like families that I have in the past, or in the context of like family therapy, for instance, and then working with teams on how to be peak performers, a lot of very similar things that come up. Things like vulnerability and management of conflict, and being able to kind of speak our truth. And and the roles that families play. You've got the rescuer, the scapegoat, or the angry uncle, or whatever it is. And then in teams, you have kind of similar kinds of roles. And so anyway, so that's a kind of an interesting example of how these fields are very much connected.
Well, so I'm curious. Do you find a lot of the team dynamics that you work with? I mean, do you have to get into people's kind of childhood? I mean, in a sense that often people's authority issues come out as a factor when there's a team. If there's a leader, if there's anyone in a leadership role, a lot of people have their whatever their authority issues are come out in that same role, which obviously ties to family of origin stuff. Yeah,
that's a great point. So I think yes, whatever our role is or our reactions are in the context of professional teamwork are influenced by our family of origin. And the work that we're doing when we go in and work with teams and leaders is less about, unpacking, their traumas or their belief systems. Belief systems certainly come into play, but we're not getting into the deep-seated experiences from childhood necessarily, right? We're talking about things like communication style and emotional intelligence and boundary setting and which again, those things come up in family work as well. But yeah, I think the major differentiator between coaching and therapy or consulting and therapy is one of the differentiators is this forward-facing lens about like where are we going, what will we do, what's the solution, rather than unpacking or exploring past events.
That makes sense.
There are other differentiators, but that's one of them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. I mean, you mentioned it, and you talk about it in the book about one of the main things you have to help people do is speaking their truth.
And
can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that doesn't seem like a kind of traditional approach when working with business, and yet it's obviously of critical value.
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a lot of group work over the course of my career, and when I say group work, I mean it in a wide variety of senses. So I mentioned families, but I've also done groups of teens or groups of adults based on various themes, right? So it could be addiction, it could be anger, it could be career transition, right? And then in the teamwork we do in my business now, it's around communication or team effectiveness or leadership development, right? And the reason I'm prefacing what I'm going to say with that is that group dynamics play out, similarly over the course of any topic that you enter into the group. And when it comes up to this question of speaking our truth, I see that play out regardless of what the content is of the group. And a great example of that is one of the ways that plays out is that oftentimes you'll have a group member that has like this strong intuition or this strong idea about something that they want to say. And it could be an observation of a dynamic of the group. It could be an observation of a client or someone outside of the group. It could be an observation of a member of the group. But they're resistant to saying it because it's uncomfortable, right? Rightfully so. However, when they finally get the courage to be vulnerable, to speak their truth, what they often find is that they have a shared experience with multiple members of the group. Right? So for instance, we're in a group together and I'm having this experience that, Bill, and just making up a name, is really toxic to our group because he's negative and because he's always taking the floor with how much he's talking, and he's always kind of undermining plans, and he doesn't follow through, fill in the blank. But Bill's a strong personality, so I'm hesitant to speak up. But once I do, 5 other people in the group are like, oh my gosh, yeah. Bill, we need to help you out, buddy. You're really causing us problems. Right. So it's a kind of a small example, but I see that play out so often, and I think to your question, that's a great exemplifying piece of how speaking our truth can be so helpful.
Totally. Yeah. Well, it's like the inability to speak becomes like that blocks the flow for everybody, and you let it out. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Totally.
I'm curious. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of tools in your toolbox. But I'm curious if you can talk about just ways of getting people over that hump.
Oh yeah, like ways to inspire courage.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's pretty interesting. There's a study that Google did I think 2 years ago now, and they looked at all of these various teams to determine like what are the major factors of peak performing teams. Like, was it the one that has the most detail in the meetings that they have, or was it the one that like always goes out on the weekend together and has this like camaraderie piece? Was it the one that has the highest IQ? And what they found out, and there's more to this study, but to really kind of shorten it, what they found out was that none of those things mattered. It wasn't the style of the team, but the largest influence in performance was psychological safety. So to this question of how do you get people to have the courage to come forward, I think you have to set conditions that then get to psychological safety. And so I think that's where great leadership comes in. And so the question might be, well, how do you create psychological safety, right? And I think another question kind of before that is, well, how do you create trust?
Right.
And so let me ask you that. What would you say if I said to you, like, how do we create trust?
For me?
Yeah, like how would you answer that question? And you could answer it generally, like, how do human beings create trust with each other?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is knowing I'm not going to be, part of it, I guess, is trusting the intent of the people around me.
Yeah.
Like, I got to trust that they actually care about what I have to say or how I feel.
Okay.
It's not going to be used against me. That I'm not going to be punished for being honest.
Okay. So what I hear you saying there is like, one of the ways to create trust is to ensure that those around us have high integrity.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Definitely.
Fair reframe?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great way to create trust and to tie it back to the team is make sure you have the right players on the team.
Right.
Make sure you have really high quality, integrity filled people in your group.
Yeah.
What else comes to mind with creating trust?
Well, similar to what I was saying, but just a little. I want to say freedom to fail or freedom to make mistakes.
Ooh, yeah, love that. Love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's been, and just in my personal life, my fear of failure, fear of making mistakes, was a huge barrier to me.
Yeah, awesome.
And learning to be okay with that, and learning that like with my relationship with Daniela, like learning that I can be not perfect and still be worthy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I think that's a great framework to tie it back to like the teams. That's a great framework teams can take on. Is that the paradigm of failure is okay.
Yeah.
And maybe further than that, failure is positive because it teaches us something, right?
Right.
If we can assume that to be true.
Right.
So those are awesome examples, man, of like we can create trust by being intentional about who we surround ourselves with, and knowing that failure is okay, maybe even good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I would add, another way we can create trust and/or psychological safety is offering vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that goes in any relationship, whether it's a one-on-one or it's a group or a family or a business or a fill in the blank. Like if we want to trust, first we have to give trust.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then through that, vulnerability can be a step in that direction. So
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, that's true. I mean, regardless of what your technical role, that puts you in a leadership role of
I love
setting
that
the culture.
I love that. Yeah, man. Yeah. That's true. I like how you frame that. Yeah, it's like that gives us all kind of the frame of the leader, right?
Yeah,
which is cool.
Yeah. Push it in the direction that you want it to go.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, be the model, the saying, like be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Yeah, trite but true.
Yeah, totally. It's a good bumper sticker, and it's also so true.
It really is. I mean, I can think about many examples where it was just that, where I was in whatever kind of a group, you know, even if it was just a 2-hour, we're all in the same room kind of thing.
Sure.
And you know, I can think about times where there was tension, and somebody just steps forward and was like, all right, you know, and makes themselves vulnerable. And then everybody kind of relaxes, and it brings out people's empathy automatically.
Totally. Yeah, it immediately changes things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. It's neat to see. It sounds like you've seen it before.
I have, but it's not something I'm well versed in, but I've seen it enough to be like, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, it is, man. Yeah, it is. That's one of the reasons I love this work is, you get witness to these powerful scenarios, you know.
Yeah, that must be really cool, working with groups and seeing the whole dynamics change, and you know, doing that enough to see the patterns underneath that and why they change this way or that way.
It is, yeah. It's fun. It's fun both in the context of, you know, transformation in groups as well as transformation in the individual, right? Because I think you can see the same thing happen when individuals choose to show up differently, right, in their life, in their work, through things like offering more vulnerability or questioning their beliefs or habits, or, you know, looking at patterns that they've had and trying to shift them because they realize they don't work anymore.
Right.
And so, yeah.
One of the things I was reading, when I was checking out your book, was just I liked how much you talked about intuition.
Oh yeah.
And I like how much you have an embodied perspective on that. Obviously, coming from your background, which martial arts, which we can dive into in a little bit. But
cool.
I love that you brought that up. I love that you brought up intuition, and that it's you speak about it as an embodied thing, which I think is very, very true.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as a muscle, right? That can be built. Yeah. You know, and one of the kind of philosophical underpinnings of the book is this idea that, you know, we are multidimensional creatures, right? Meaning that we can't really live in silos if we want to be super effective in all parts of life. And so, the book covers these 7 dimensions of our lived experience that I've seen always come up. You know, whether it was a therapy client or a professional coaching client or a leader or a team. And these themes are all different aspects of our life, right? Like how we think, how we feel, how we take care of our body, environments that we're in, and a handful of others. And they're like the major influencers when it comes to creating, a positive change in our life. And when they're not explored, often become the inhibitors to said change process, whatever that change is that we want to create, right? It's almost irrelevant what the change is. Right. And so to this idea of intuition, I think that the same thing applies. Like, intuition is influenced by all of these various factors in our life, right? Who we surround ourselves with, how we think, our emotional life, our physical experience, all these various things. And so, yeah, man, that's what gets me really excited is looking at the complexity of our experience and really trying to figure out what creates momentum, where are the barriers, breaking through those. And it's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, the whole theme of changes. And just something I've been noticing more and more is I'm not sure how to organize this in my head, but the ability to change our own habits is such an incredibly powerful thing. Yeah. I mean, some of my perspective on this comes from, I don't know if you ever read Castaneda's books.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carlos.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the fundamental things that Don Juan was teaching is, to be able to change your own habits.
Yeah.
And it takes energy to do that, but then when you do it frees up more energy. And I mean, it's partly not to go too down that rabbit hole, but like that's kind of the essence of stalking oneself is to be able to change your own habits.
Sure.
And so we have modern even clinical language that can talk about that, but it's so fundamentally true, and there's more and more, because kind of the I was going to say old paradigm. That's not really the right word, but I think more people are realizing that that's actually possible, that you can, and actually critically necessary to living the life you want, because we adopt these habits and then they kind of go on autopilot.
Yeah, man. I think I really love what you just said, and I think it's so true. And again, that's another one of these kind of underpinnings of the book is this idea of critical evaluation of self across these life domains. Yeah. And I think that is true. And culturally, we're in this autopilot time, right? And in our thinking, even, just accepting the information that is given to us without chewing, just swallowing.
Right.
Accepting the relationships, accepting the financial situations we were talking about earlier, right? Like this blind acceptance rather than a real critical analysis of, is this serving me? Is it in line with what I want to create in my life? Is it congruent to my beliefs and values? Yeah. What are my beliefs and values?
Right.
I mean,
right.
Yeah, so I really love that, Steve. Yeah. So important.
Yeah, it is. And it's easy to talk about. It's hard work.
Oh man, it is. It is. All this stuff is easy to talk about, but harder to apply.
Do you find that to be true that the more someone realizes they can change their habits, then that kind of starts to snowball?
I do. I think I do find that to be true. Again, regardless of what the change is, I think certainly it needs to start with the belief of possibility, right? We have to believe that change is possible. Right? We have to believe that creating new habits is possible. And then, also to that point, exploring what is influencing our habits is also critical, right? Is it our physical experience that's influencing our habits? Because, as you and I know, like if we're not getting good nutrition, if we're not getting good sleep, if we're not getting good movement, that's going to drastically influence our decision making.
Sure. Which
then snowballs into habits, right? For better or for worse.
Right.
And so really looking at, what's my physical experience? What's my emotional experience? Are there traumas that I've had? Is there a certain emotional disposition that I have that is influencing my choices, which then influences my actions, right? And so I think that this cross-sectional evaluation of where are the influencers, for better or for worse, is super critical.
Yeah. And across all those dimensions, it's easy to see how, if I've got some, I guess I'm thinking, as most of my team experience has been as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. The ultimate team.
Right. And the ultimate, you're gonna keep dealing with the consequences. And so just having to look at my habitual responses to things, and then how that plays out, and then have to go look at, okay, why do I respond that way?
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. That really evaluating what's the reaction?
Yeah, and it's made me confront a lot of my own beliefs.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, because I've always had this kind of anti-authoritarian, knee-jerk almost response.
Sure.
And there's things about that I question things naturally, and that's what strength. But but there was a reactive anti-authoritarian thing. But then I became the authority. And so I didn't want to tell people what to do. But I got little kids.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've been a little more on the hands-off side of things because I don't like telling people what to do unnecessarily, and I've had to watch where that's been the wrong approach, and learn to accept, like, I need to change my whole perspective on this, and accept that sometimes you need to tell people what to do. You know?
Yeah. You know, I really love the idea of like the embracing of the shadow.
Yeah.
You know, and this, and you just beautifully described a characteristic that has both a very positive edge to it, and then a challenging edge to, like a shadow aspect, right? But if we can see that and then really integrate, you know, there's rewards.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it sounds like for you, some of those rewards might be like less conflict in the house, maybe, or you know, better experience with, you know, with the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's again, just looking at those group dynamics and how you change one thing and how the whole kind of ecosystem adjusts, you know?
Yeah. I was on a call this week with a guy, a really interesting gentleman, and we were talking about systems of you know, of all things, right? Like taking a systems perspective. You know, a person is a system, right? A team is a system. Yeah, an organization, a company is a system.
Yeah.
And you know, kind of so on and so forth. You can expand out into the larger macro. But to your point, it's like if you move one lever in a system, it changes, it ripples. Right? And that's, I think, such an important thing for all of us to remember, regardless of our professional or personal role.
Yeah.
You know, levers in the system impact the system as a whole. Right?
And like you were saying, some levers have, you know, greater mechanical advantage than others, you know?
Yeah.
Going out drinking with your team on Friday nights might be cool, but it's not as important as developing, you know, safety and trust.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then going out drinking with your team, that lever will influence things, right? For better, for worse.
For better, for worse. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
fun. Well, so on the topic of changes. So so part, just for folks who listening, part of how you and I know each other is through martial arts, and initially through pushing hands together and then sparring and
so fun, man. It's been great to connect with you, and just martial arts is big, you know, for both of us. You know, such a big piece of our life.
Absolutely.
I was talking about. Well, sorry, I feel like I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No. That was just a lead-in.
Oh, okay. It's funny. We were talking last night. We were having we're out with a couple friends. We were having ice cream last night, and they started, you know, kind of joking around about, because they all know I do martial arts. They're joking around, kind of poking at me and stuff. And it's funny. I have this recognition about myself that it's an area of my life that, and on the one hand, I am so passionate about, and so. I mean, I have a lot of experience and a lot of education, a lot of knowledge. So there's that, and then on sometimes when it's you know, in a different environment, I get really shy about it and really, you know, very humble and quiet and So I was just talking to my girlfriend about that this morning, about this reflection around my own kind of relationship and dynamic with the martial arts.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So what's curious for you? Like, how does that show up for you in your life?
That kind of
because you're the same, and you have all of these years of training and knowledge and expertise, you know, and you don't have a school, right? You don't teach a lot, right?
Not really.
And so what's that? I'm curious. It's kind of just like a spontaneous question, but what's that like for you to have all of this passion and knowledge and insight, and not talk about it a lot, or not be sharing it regularly?
Yeah. Well, and I've been sharing it more, and I've had more of a drive to be sharing it.
Awesome.
You know, and part of that is because, I mean, there was you know, once upon a time, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, start to, you know, part of it is age and responsibilities and all that stuff, but it's like, once upon a time, I could train for hours alone every day and be satisfied with that. I mean, I would go, you know, learn from teachers and stuff, but it was like my solo practice, I needed no motivation, no excuse.
Yeah.
That was central to me, and it was a very, very personal thing.
Sure.
You know, and so there's a few concepts in there I think that are tied in, but one being that's the part of the almost secrecy of it. It was like I remember I had one teacher that we always trained outside in public, and that used to freak me out. Because to me, this was like, it was a sacred thing,
Sure.
I'm doing this for me. I'm not doing this for show. I'm not doing this for anyone else.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a purity of that. Which can also get in the way.
I love that. It's sacred. A sacred thing. Yeah. It's funny. I started studying at the school years ago, and still train there up in Boone, right, which is a couple hours from where we live, and for me it has been and continues to be like a spiritual experience, a continued cultivation of self, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it really, I like the word sacred for it, because it feels like a practice that continues to push and teach me about who I am as a human being, as much as it gives me skills and knowledge and develop physically, right?
Exactly.
And so maybe that's part of it. The sacredness of it is kind of leans me into wanting to be less showy about it. Right. Right.
And I think there's a certain amount of just respecting the art that comes from. But also that can also get in the way, depending on what your needs and goals are.
Well, and I don't know about for you, but I also, this is funny, this is like this two-sided sword, right? Like we were talking about with the shadow. At the same time, I love to teach. I love to be up in front of 75 people in a class and doing work together. That fills me with energy.
And more it's been it can be exhilarating, actually. And so more and more I have been teaching, partly like I said, just because of time and effort. Once upon a time I needed no excuse, and now it's like life gets so full and busy that part of why I've been making myself teach more is because I know I have to train.
Teach, Yep.
And so it keeps me, I was going to say on point, more or less, but it keeps me connected, and it provides me with some kind of excuse that, on one hand, why you need an excuse? Well, they're helpful, It's helpful to know, I got people coming over, I got to make sure, I'm sharp on these things. And then some of it too is also part of what I'm enjoying about it is, like you said, you do it to make yourself a better person. It's a self-cultivation. And so part of it is, I like being surrounded by people in a context where we're there for one reason, which is to make ourselves better human beings. And those are the people I want to be around, is people that are working hard to make themselves better. Because you and I know it's not about fighting. Fighting's part of it.
Sure.
But it's not about fighting. That's not, that wouldn't keep my interest for this long.
Exactly. Yeah, myself as well. And I know you and I have talked about doing a collaborative teaching event together, whether it's more along the lines of self-defense or along the lines of philosophy or leadership or whatever. I think we should do it.
We definitely should do it.
We really should. We should just pick a date and go for it. So so if you're listening to this and you're in the Asheville area and you'd like to see a workshop around either self-defense or leadership in martial arts or team effectiveness in martial arts, let us know. Write to Steve. Tell us what you'd like to see.
We're itching to do something for it. Part of the problem is there's so many. We sat down and brainstormed. We had like 12 ideas that were like, this would be a great weekend. That would be a great weekend. Dang. But to bring it back around to your book title changes. So to you and I, obviously that ties in clearly to martial arts. Maybe we should try to explain that a little bit for folks that maybe don't understand that. But
So the subtitle of the book, and I'm going to go back to martial arts, but the subtitle of the book is The Busy Professional's Guide to Reducing Stress, Accomplishing Goals, and Mastering Adaptability. And I think that this word adaptability is so present in martial arts, right? As it is in leadership, right? As it is in team effectiveness, as it is in life, right? I mean, so in martial sense, like in a conflict scenario, like the highest level martial artist, in my opinion, is able to move fluidly, regardless of style, regardless of attack or of the other person's expertise or the other person's energy or aggression level, right? They should be able to adapt. They should be able to move seamlessly throughout an engagement meaning a conflict, right? So I think that's the time with martial arts. But what about for you when you think about adaptability? What does that inspire for you in your thinking?
Well, I mean, I agree with what you said entirely. And so, some of that is being able to abandon what you think you know.
Yeah.
Or what you think's going to happen.
Love it.
And that doesn't mean not having a plan, but it definitely means not being rigidly attached to the plan. When things start moving sideways, you better respond.
Yeah. Exactly.
And some of it also means, I mean, to really be adaptable and to really change and flow, you got to be present, 100%. You can't be 2 seconds in the past or future.
Love it.
And that's part of what I find so personally rewarding. When I get to play with people, when I train or roughhouse, whatever, when there's contact and chaos involved, the brain, it doesn't automatically turn off, but that's part of the practice, is just being fully present, because I don't know what you're going to do. I might think you're going to punch my face, and if a kick comes up to my nuts, I better respond immediately.
Right. Yeah. Without reaction. Right. Like there might be like a reptilian reaction to block or to move or to flank, but not an emotional reaction. Right. To be able to stay present and calm and relaxed and in control of our breath. Right. And I think what's so beautiful about that, as it relates to life, is that those are the same principles that apply to managing chaos or adaptability to challenging circumstance.
Absolutely.
Right. Maintain our breath, maintain our awareness, maintain presence. Do not react emotionally. Know that this is a temporary thing. Right. So it's just so. It's so beautiful. Someone asked me recently, about writing, like, you got a book, what's it been like, blah, blah, are you going to write another one? And I've been kind of thinking about that in the last month or two, about if I'll write another one. And one of the things that I think about that drives so much passion for me is this connection between effectiveness in martial arts and effectiveness in life. And so I think that might, well, who knows? But that might be the next book that comes about. We'll see.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. There's a lot there. In like every aspect of it, especially interrelational stuff. Maybe not especially, but certainly with interrelations and stuff. But what you talked about was the emotional piece and not reacting, and that's something that I've been really enjoying watching with the people I've been training, is watching the fear levels go down.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
I love that.
And watching the body relax.
With
that,
there's this concept I'll teach on sometimes called the 4 R's. Have we talked about this before?
I think you mentioned it, but please.
Okay. So there's this well-known phrase that I'm sure most people have heard, is like the difference between reacting and responding, right? And the idea that we don't want to have like a fly off the handle reaction, whether it's in a conflict or it's in a a road rage scenario, right? We want to instead respond, which is calm and collected and thought through and relaxed, right? And so I think that idea is great, but the application is challenging, for people, I think for all of us. How do we actually translate that into a regular application? And so that's where I think these other two R's come in, which is resist or relax, right? And so I think when we are in a reactive state, right? And I've done a lot of workshops around this, and it's funny because I won't tell people what the other R's are. I'll just say, think of a time that you've been reactive, right? And I'll say, tell me a little bit about what your body was feeling during that time. And people say things like, I was tense, I was hot, my stomach was churning, I was like rigid or pacing around real intensely. So all these kind of intense body, right, reactions. And then I'll say, okay, tell me about a time you really effectively responded with grace. And they'll say, oh yeah, I got one. And then I'll say, okay, tell me about how your body felt during that time. And they'll say, oh, I was deep breaths and I was calm and, a little, maybe even a little tired, just real kind of serene, right? They were relaxed. So I think this resistance and relaxation is a great application to really understand how to apply this reaction versus response. And we can reverse engineer it, in my opinion. Meaning that if we can understand this on the front end through retrospection, right, looking back at times, eventually what we'll be able to get to is, oh man, I'm really angry, and what I feel in my body is tension or heat or stomach churning or whatever, and notice it. Mm-hmm. And then through that noticing, be able to change physical states, right? So the body can be a teacher to get us to a state of relaxation and calm and responsiveness, right? But that requires, just like martial arts, right? Requires practice and awareness and presence.
Absolutely.
But we can totally get there.
Yeah.
Totally get there.
Yeah.
Does that resonate for you?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the. I think you're touching on the core of the practice.
Yeah.
And that's why, there's different approaches to martial arts, as with anything, but and when someone wants to learn, the most straightforward, down and dirty, survive the scenario, in 3 months or less,
Yep.
This may not be the most critical thing,
Right.
But then over time, it's like, part of what we're doing is learning to stay relaxed with increasing levels of stress and pressure.
There you go. Yep.
And so that's where, deep, breathing into the dantian, lowering the breath, how does that relate? Well, partly when you get stressed, whether it's physical confrontation, whether you're in a fight or road rage or anything, our breath tends to rise up.
Yeah.
And so, and when that's in the moment and you're absorbed and everything's up and you're hot and you're on fire and you're in the head and you're forward leaning, it's hard to just be like, breathe into your belly,
Yeah, right.
Unless you've spent a lot of time and
Exactly.
you can actually, because that's not easy.
No. Yeah, it's funny. We'll do a lot of workshops with teams and leaders around stress reduction. And that's one of the most common questions I get is, well, what are the strategies? What are the techniques? Is like forward breathing technique or whatever. And there are all these awesome strategies. Yeah. And in my experience, it's not the tip or the tool or the strategy in the face of stress that's going to be the golden arrow, right?
Right.
It's going to be the practice over time that gets you to the ability to manage when there is a stressful situation. And it's interesting because it's not really the answer that people want, right? People want like, what's the fix?
Right.
And the fix is the practice.
Right.
Fix is the management, so that when the time of chaos comes, you have the tools and the ability to respond effectively. But that that requires work.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I like that you bring up, the different styles. I'm gonna tie this into something we talked about earlier. That there's all these different styles of martial arts, right? Jiu-jitsu, kung fu, Krav Maga, and Tai Chi, and they're all very different from each other. And I've often gotten the question, and I'm sure you have too, from people that are relatively new or they're brand new, and they say, well, what martial arts should I study, or what school should I go to? Mm-hmm. And my question is always for them, what do you want to get out of it?
Totally.
Right? And again, back to this topic we were talking about earlier about critical analysis of self, right? Critical analysis of, what do I want to create in my life? And what are the influencers? And so oftentimes I'll ask that question, they're like, well, I don't really know. Or maybe they do know. Maybe they're like, I want straight up self-defense. I want to be able to protect myself in 3 months. It's like, okay, well maybe a style like Krav Maga would be good. Or I want to be able to relax in the face of stress, and I want to be able to build some muscle. Relaxation, meditation, maybe it's Tai Chi, right? And so, yeah, I like that question and the opportunity that it offers us to really evaluate, what is it that I want to create in my life.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, and like you said before, one area of your life will influence the rest,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Whether it's a movement art or particularly a martial art, that will ingrain certain patterns, and some of them will be emotional patterns, and then sometimes, we need to try different things and change and bounce around,
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's part of the fun. I mean,
It is.
It is. Yeah, and I'm very much a mutt for that reason, because
Yeah.
Every new situation is stress, and then so it's easy to kind of rest on our laurels when if you train with one crew in one way all the time.
Right.
I mean, you're even still growing, assuming everybody's pushing themselves or everyone's still growing. Then you get together with somebody from a totally different perspective, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
What did you just do to me?
yeah, I love that. And that's such a great tie into life as well, right? I mean, we're talking about styles and training methodologies within martial arts, but again, I think the same applies for effectiveness in life, which is if we continue to surround ourselves with the same thinking and style and approach, we might get similar results, right? If we want to really expand our awareness and our ability to create effective change in our life, sometimes that might require evaluation of or change in the environments that we're in. Right. And that's one of the 7 principles in the book is environment, right? Looking at what are the surroundings that we're in and how is that influencing what we want to create. So yeah, that continued diversity and evaluation, I think is really important.
Yeah. And just kind of tying back to a little bit before was so it's like certain attitudes, both embodied attitudes, physical and mental, and it's like there are certain practices that are very fire, and certain fighting strategies that are very kind of fire. Depending on what elemental breakdown, but straightforward, crashing through the line, just overwhelming defenses. Versus more of a water kind of like, you want the space, have the space. I'm not there anymore, but it's yours. And with martial strategies and getting to see the different strategies work and not work, and and same with leadership or relation. And that's part of where I think it's so helpful to be able to that crossover exists, because you do have to, you kind of change your whole perception when you go from like a fire approach to a water approach, for example,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and ultimately, in martial arts and in leadership, for instance, and we're talking about the elements a little bit, and I don't know how familiar your audience is with elemental approach, but
some are.
For those that are listening and aren't, check it out. Give it a look. Because typically there's these kind of like psychological components or emotional components related to each element, right? And to your point, approaches. So I think the highest level martial artists are able to adapt, right, to all elements, right? Able to institute a fire approach or a water approach based on scenario. And I think that the same applies for leadership, for instance, as you brought up. Really savvy leaders can adapt and know when it's time to be aggressive, when it's time to hold back, when it's time to ask questions, right? When it's time to hold ground, an earth approach, right? And so I think, it absolutely applies in both spaces. Yeah. This is fun, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I love the crossover.
Yeah, there are so many. I do this, which you're very familiar with push hands, right? And so I'll do this exercise with groups of leaders where I'll have them do a little push hands with each other, real basic, like a single hand, or sometimes two hands. And what's fascinating is to watch how their body moves as it relates to how they communicate.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and we'll talk about this. We'll do the exercise, which is basically, for folks that don't know, having a one-on-one kind of non-striking scenario, but just trying to push each other without breaking contact to move each other off balance. You get off balance, you reset, and you start again. And it's more complicated than that, but that's the basic of it. And what's fun to see is that people that are very rigid in their personality often are rigid in this exercise.
Right.
And people that, and I'm just giving examples, but people that are easily blown over or bulldozed are often very easily moved over in the context of this exercise, right? People that are very reactive or explosive, right, often show that way in their body as they move with this one-on-one. And so it's so fun because, when I've done this, most of the folks in the room, or usually all, have no frame of reference for martial arts or for push hands. So it's fun to see that show up in their body and then ask them, well, how does that relate to how you communicate?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God. I remember this one woman, she said, oh my God, I have been rolling over my team for the last 3 years and I just realized it.
Nice.
And it all it took was her realizing what she was doing in her body in this paired activity to see how that's showing up in her leadership. It's really fun. Yeah, it's really fun.
Cool. And that's cool that you've got to work with it in that context and see those parallels, because like I intuitively understand that, but you've got you've literally put those side by side, and like, yep, when you think and feel this way, you move this way too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a ton of fun to see the insights that are created again when we hone into the wisdom of our body, right? There's a lot available for us.
Yeah, and like you're saying, the different aspects of life and how they play together, and each of them can be a training ground.
Yeah,
you know. And so, if someone's too rigid, to be able to practice physically being less rigid, and how that'll affect their mindset and their communication skills.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you're, if you keep getting blown over, how to root and keep your center. Without being rigid, that's the dance.
It is
easier said than done, but yeah, I mean, there's a bit of shape shifting in a sense. Yeah,
there is. Yeah, again, the adaptability piece, being able to respond effectively to whatever is coming at us is so important in life and relationships and martial arts. It's a common thread.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So with that adaptability, and so talk about when you think about adaptability, and yet how does someone be adaptable and not be wishy-washy?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think it's kind of to your point about how do we hold our ground, while being fluid. One of the things, back to leadership and team development, one of the things that comes up a lot in the work that we do is boundary setting.
Yeah.
Right? And so being very clear about what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what does a path to success look like for me, for my team, for those that I'm leading, what is a path to failure or dismissal or separation, right? What might it look like if we get to the point where this is no longer a fit, right? So being very transparent and clear about what are those two directions look like. I think that can create ground for us, and not being wishy-washy, but having a clear path, a clear trajectory ahead of us. So I think that's one thing that comes to mind. And then I think, the other thing that comes to mind is having practices that ground us across our life, right? So whether it's exercise or meditation or some kind of self-care that keeps us grounded, and keeps our stress low and keeps our ability to respond rather than react, high and cultivated. I think that prevents being wishy-washy. The other thing that comes to mind is, again, a common theme that we see is creating regular feedback loops.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
So creating regular feedback loops. And again, that's a practice that applies across life domains. It applies in martial arts, continually getting insight from others around us, and observation from others around us. I think that can create groundedness.
You can talk about a little bit more about the feedback loops.
Yeah, sure.
That seems hypercritical.
Yeah, which sense? What intrigues you about it?
Well, I'm actually, I guess that's part of what I'm wondering is in which senses. I mean, I guess this can be personal. This can be within your team or interrelational. But like, how do you set that up with a team if you're working with a team?
Yeah, so I think in the context of of teamwork, it can be as simple as offering regular time for deconstruction of the dynamic. So offering regular time for this kind of meta-analysis of what is actually happening with our group.
Yeah.
Right. How strong is the safety? What do we need to be better interpersonally? Right. What is there any person or subgroup happening that might be influencing our effectiveness? Right. Giving each other one-on-one time to say, okay, Steve, here's how I experienced you, in the last few weeks. Can you give me some feedback on how have I been showing up in meetings? How have I been showing up in projects? How have I been showing up in client interaction? Right. So, yes, I think it can be done. It can be done simply and in a wide variety of ways to create regular improvements. Yeah. And in the context of like martial arts, I think feedback loops are when we are engaged outside of the solo practice, right?
Right.
A feedback loop is a drill, or it's sparring, or it's cross training with other styles, right? Or it's pressure testing,
right?
Yeah,
right.
So I think just as important, I think one of the risks. Again, crossover, but one of the risks in martial arts without feedback is that we get into a delusional perspective about what will actually work.
Totally.
Which is dangerous. If we ever are in a conflict scenario and we've been training something that we think has worked but has never been given feedback, that's a dangerous position to be in.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the context of team effectiveness, if we don't give each other feedback, we get into mindsets and we get into patterns and habits and routines without question that may be totally undermining our performance.
Yeah.
And they undermine us because we've never questioned them. We never tested them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
and even with, I was just telling somebody the other day, but talking about body work, and they were asking like, well, basically like, what advice would you give to yourself when you just got out of school? And it was like, create those feedback loops. I used to work on people, and then maybe 20% of the time I'd hear about how it was, and it was like if I just had the forwardness to call people up and ask, okay, how was, has your pain level increased or decreased or no change since, if I just created the feedback loops,
right.
I would have improved so much quicker.
Absolutely.
In those early years.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things in the context of like our own work. That's one of the things I'm really intentional about too with all of our clients, whether it's a team or a company or a one-on-one coaching scenario, always asking for feedback. We're always, having people, fill out various forms at various time points along the way to see what's working, what needs to change, what can be improved, all that. Yeah. So, I think it applies in relationships too, right?
Yeah.
With our partners even.
Oh, critically.
Critically.
Yeah.
What's working, what's not.
And learning. Well, talk to me about that. You've worked with people from all kinds of perspectives.
Yeah.
Like, I know. I don't know how how universal this is, but feedback can be hard. It can be hard to take, especially if it's not positive. The positive feedback's great.
Right, yeah.
But realizing that you're coming across like a jerk when you don't mean to be.
Sure.
Like, that can be a hard pill to swallow. People's defensiveness and stuff, and like, that's kind of a whole separate topic, but I guess that comes back to that emotional safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more safety that exists, the easier feedback is, right? And that applies to our significant others, right? It applies to good teams, applies to good leadership. And I think feedback is most difficult when it's irregular, right? Meaning that just like anything else, if we practice getting regular feedback all the time, right? And again, across aspects of our lived experience, even though the negative feedback isn't necessarily going to be great, I think we can get better at receiving it and embracing it and doing something with it.
Yeah.
Versus never asking for it, and then when we get it, it really stings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, especially when you've been doing it for years that way.
Yeah, exactly. So like with every change that we want to make in our life, it requires practice and familiarity and adjustments, and we can get better at it. I was talking to someone not too long ago about this idea of change as a skill set, which is so interesting that it's something that it's like the thing that we can count on.
Change.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And
the only constant in the universe.
Yeah. And it's not a tool that is given to us. There is not. Okay, Steve. Here's how you manage change.
Right.
That should be being taught, in my opinion, at the grade school level and every
all the way through.
all the way through. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That should be the tool in our tool belt.
Yeah.
How do we effectively manage, influence, and create sustainable, positive change in our life?
Yeah.
How do we manage chaos?
Yeah.
How do we become adaptable?
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy to me that these questions aren't being asked at every level of education.
You're right. I mean, it's kind of a meta skill.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think it's becoming more and more required. I mean, on one hand, okay, everything's always changed. But the pace of change in the modern world, and not to get whatever a lot of the old structures are falling apart. Sure. Everything's changing.
Yeah.
Economically, the education system's changing. Like a lot of and it's like the people. There's a quote, you've probably seen it. I don't remember who to attribute it to, but just talking about how the near coming future. It's like the people who really succeed are the people who are going to be able to learn new things and then adapt quicker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's so much change, and people in business, it's like what you're competing with didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, to your point, I think it is becoming a more and more necessary meta skill.
Yeah.
Right. Necessary, I think, is a fair word.
I think so.
Yeah, because also to your point, it's like we're in this time of rapid growth, right, and exponential growth. Mm-hmm. Right. Things are faster now than they have been 3 years ago. 3 years from now, they'll be faster than they ever have been.
Right.
And so it's an interesting time in human history, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
So, man, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. More than I always love rapping with you. So.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Absolutely.
Any parting words or contact info? Want to?
Sure. Yeah.
Tell people how to buy the book.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So, I'll give a couple resources. One is if people are interested in leadership and team effectiveness, they can check out the website, which is arcintegrated.com, arcintegrated.com. They can learn about what we do there, and please feel free to reach out. There's contact information there. I welcome questions and dialogue and feedback. And then if they want to check out the book, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If they want to deep dive into some of it and sign up for some free goodies, they can go to thechangesbook.com, and there's some resources there as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.